Remember everybody about the 4 years of the whole open borders and illegal alien 12 million? That was all going merrily along until Ron DeSantis and Governor Abbott in Texas said, you know what? These people are all for illegal immigration in the abstract. What if they were in the concrete? Let's bus people up to Martha's Vineyard. So they did, not a lot, and immediately they wanted to virtue signal. So they had puff jackets and their old designer hand clothes. Remember little boxes, and they went to their civic center and they gave them this. And then they thought, that's it, isn't it? I mean, don't they see how magnanimous I am? I gave them my son's puff jacket, and I had a pair of my husband's Gucci shoes, and I had an old pair of designer French sunglasses I gave to them.
Some power bars,
yeah. And you know what? Don't we have that Range Rover with 100,000 miles? Can't we give it to them? So, but they're still here. What are we going to do? Well, we'll send them to a military base or the inner city. Well, that's great. So then they said, "Oh, we love you so much. We just would like you to go now," and they did. But this is a little different because now it's their servants, as we say in Latin, servi, and they want them to be parachuted in. If they could get drones, that would be the best solution that they could come up with. If you get a drone, they could ride a drone, come in the morning, land, clean the toilets, fix the house up, and then the drone could take them back to, I don't know where, they don't care, maybe a hotel in Manhattan or something. And they can deal with gangs, but they don't. And I'm talking cynically because I have this bizarre experience that I live in an area where the per capita income is somewhere between 16 and 17,000 versus one where it's 130,000, and it's only 4 hours apart. And California is 45% to 50% Hispanic, because of open borders, for the most part. The majority of that population is mostly from Mexico. But this is ground zero here, where I am, because it's cheaper. And there are no rules. California is the most legal and the most illegal state. And what I mean by that is to accommodate this problem of having 11 to 12 million people who came in over the last 20 years illegally and cannot obtain parity because most came without a high school diploma, without skills, without English, without legality, without money. Then you had to have all of these social programs, but you also had to suspend the law. And when you have social programs and you suspend the law, somebody has to pay for that. So what California did is, a lot of people say to me, why is it so hyper-regulated? Why do they measure the height of your mailbox in Atherton? Or why, when I want to take out a eucalyptus branch in Menlo Park, I got to get a permit? Or why do we have all these? Well, because we have no regulations where I live. So, I do, but so within my 2-mile radius, I would say there's 10 compounds. And traditionally, this means an old ranch-style farmhouse is owned or rented out by somebody, and then he does this. He gets a Winnebago, a old trailer, a garage, and 4 or 5, or a big barn, and divides it up into places. And then he brings in entire families from Mexico, and they bring in dogs, cats, a lot of animals, horses, cattle, and something that is zoned for a single family is now maybe have 50 people. And all of these California rules that have to be maintained because we are a green sensitive state have to be suspended. And so what that means is all the people who follow laws have to be hyper-regulated to balance it out. So when I have a huge bin, but I also now have to separate my garbage from glass, from this, from plastic, and I also, on our land, we have an old pond, beautiful. It was one of the most beautiful places I thought in the world growing up. My brother sold it. It's a long story, but I walk around it every night. It's adjacent to my little 42 acres, the remnant of our farm. You should see it, Jack. I'll put some things on. It just, and undescribable what it looks like. If you're an environmentalist and you believe in the pristine wildlife and natural habitat and fauna and flora, you would be shocked. And you would be shocked about the indifference people come in. They come in with, now this week there's a big new washer. In the almond orchard, there's a big refrigerator. There is a dryer. There is a car seat. But most of it just wet garbage, just junk. And it's strewn all over the alleyways. It's into the bottom of the pond. So when the water comes in from the irrigation district, you get bottles and stuff that float up. And you see animals picking through it. There's a whole bunch of coyotes this morning I saw going through it. So my point is that there's no rules. So nobody, I asked a person once, a person who came out to inspect my solar panels. I got solar panels. It took a year, Jack, 1 year to get the permits. And then when I put them on a beautiful shed that was built in 1980 and met code, they didn't know it was on their map. So they said, you know what? That's not on our map. And I said, it's because it's an ag-exempt building and there was no law that you had to have a permit in 1980. You just had to meet code. And anytime they came out for another inspection, they looked at it. Oh, no, it has to pass. So I had to go reapply. Well, I said there's a mile away, there's 5 homes on a single dwelling zone place, and they're not homes. There's open Romex. There's porta potties with no septic. There's horses out in the middle of the road sometime. It's just a chaotic, and they're using this area. And he said, are you crazy? Why would I go over there? I said, what do you mean? Why would I go over there? There's M13, there's Serranos, there's Norteños. He said, what would I do? Put a red tag on one of the Winnebagos and they're going to obey. In 30 days, they're going to have it up to code. There is no code. So I said, then you go after me? He said, basically, that's what we do. We go after people who follow the law. And we have millions of people who are on the other side of the law, not in a bad way. And he was defending them. I shouldn't present this as if he was criticizing them. So what I'm saying is that these people and Atherton they're hyper-regulated and they like this and they do not know where these people live. They must by needs live under different circumstances in hotels in the Queens or the Bronx, and they will not follow the protocols that everybody else has to follow. So last night we went out to dinner and I would say I saw 3 open marts, and I'm talking not just, I'm on the corner selling root beer. I'm talking about a de facto restaurant with long tables and a cook and everything. There's no health inspection. There's no sales tax. There's no income tax. And then another one where it was all lit up and they were selling clothes and everything, flowers. But my point is, in California, we have a huge black market. And that about 2 miles from me, there's about 5,000 people every Sunday. And that's where they do their shopping, from everything from furniture to appliances, no sales tax, nothing. But to make up for that, you've got to be hyper-regulated. And that's what people don't understand about illegal aliens, that when you bring somebody in to work in your home and then you send them out and then you say that Jose was the greatest guy in the world, he probably is. But you don't know how this system is making Jose live. So Jose will be living contrary to the zoning laws or the health laws or all these regulations that make life very burdensome for everybody else. And so in California, just expand that by 1 million or 2 incidents every day, and it's frightening. And so, and then people come in with guns, and I've seen protected species like barn owls. I saw a great horned owl about 5 years ago shot, and the people just shoot. They come in, they fish, they throw trash everywhere, and nobody speaks English. And then you're a racist or you're a xenophobe or you're a settler or whatever term of disparagement is used for noting it. But if Gavin Newsom wanted really to stop the $76 billion deficit and he wanted to apply the law equally, I think he'd have a revolution. It wouldn't be about deportation alone. It would be about saying, you know what? We've got the biggest black market of any state in the union, and we're going to crack down on everybody who's not paying sales tax and not filing income tax. We're not going to have a cash society anymore. And if you're an electrician or you're a plumber, you're going to be paid deportation alone. It would be about saying, you know what? We've got the biggest black market of any state in the union, and we're going to crack down on everybody who's not paying sales tax and not filing income tax. We're not going to have a cash society anymore. And if you're an electrician or you're a plumber, you're going to be paid on a payroll system. No more barter, no more cash. And I think it would destroy thousands of lives, and that's how it is. And all the people in Martha's Vineyard just see one aspect, so then they become very liberal. And giving somebody a puff jacket does not make you a saint. It really doesn't. You are employing somebody here who's illegally here. And that is not the end of it. That's the beginning of it. And so that's what Tom Homan's trying to do. They're trying to say 55 million people that were not born in the United States, 16% of the population, some citizens, some green card, but the majority here illegally. It's too much. And we've got to go back to a normal application of the law. So if somebody wants to put solar panels on their shed, we are going to regulate them. Okay. But if somebody wants to rent out 5 Winnebagos, we're going to regulate them too. And it's not going to be that the people who were arrested for breaking the law, we're not going to say, oh, you're picking on migrants or you're a racist. No, we're going to treat people. It's racism the other way. The other way. You drove out 15 million people out of California, maybe 20 the last 40 years, because to subsidize this huge group coming in who needed to have parity, you taxed the hell out of the middle class, and the people who were wealthy were for all this because they were not subject to the consequences of their ideology. And these are the Martha Vineyard types of California, just the way it is.
Well, fascinating, Victor, fascinating. Well, we're going to, since I was talking about New York, we're going to stick to New York a little bit, and then we have a bunch of Donald Trump actions to get your views on, and we'll get to all this when we come back from these important messages. We are back with the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Again, we're recording on the 8th of February, and this episode will be up on Thursday, the 13th. Victor's website is The Blade of Perseus. VictorHanson.com is the address. If you're a fan of Victor's writing, you should subscribe. It's $65 a year, which is discounted from the monthly rate, which is $6.50 a month. You want to do monthly? Do monthly. But it's cheaper to take an annual subscription. Why would you do that? Because Victor writes a ton of stuff every week and collectively annually for The Blade of Perseus. 2 exclusive articles, 1 exclusive video. Plus, there are links to Victor's many other appearances, the archives of these podcasts, his writings for American Greatness, and his weekly syndicated column. So go there, subscribe. You're a fan of Victor. You are. You love his writing. Get it all. The Blade of Perseus. Victor, here's a headline, New York Post. You know, politically here, Governor Hochul, who barely won an election, and she's up in 2026, and Lee Zeldin, who is now the he's the environmental EPA director. He was a congressman. There's some talk that he will run against her again, but there's also talk of a primary challenge from Richie Torres, who's a congressman from all places, the Bronx. Yeah. But he's been a great friend of Israel and a critic of the way things are going to some degree with the Democrat Party, but especially in New York State, because Hochul is one of these green, mad, insane people who are spending a ton of your money, taxpayers' money, for these green programs. It costs. Somebody's got to pay for it. How's it paid? Well, here's a headline. Here's a piece from the New York Post. The utility giant, that's Con Edison, Con Ed, is asking the Public Service Commission to jack up average electric bills by 11.4% and send gas bills soaring 13.3%, a move that could mean a wallet-busting $1,848 more per year than customers paid in 2020. Victor, that's a staggering amount, and maybe I can afford that, but I don't know how a lot of people can afford essentially $2,000 more than they were paying 5 years ago, on top of everything else they're paying a ton more. Last thing, on my own bill in Connecticut, I pay $200 a month here last month, and there's $37 for public benefits, which has nothing to do with electricity for me, has to do with welfare programs. So this is a tax. Everyone's being taxed insanely on energy.
We're up to almost 40 cents a kilowatt. We have the same problem. Our bills are more expensive than yours. But you're similar in New York. I read that Con Edison has the same problem as PG&E. 1/4 of their users do not pay their bills, and it's against the law to cut their power off. So whether you're in need or not, if you choose not to, you'll have a administrative hearing or something, but you'll continue to get power, and then you wait for an amnesty that's coming from the governor or something. And then you are saying to everybody else, I'm not going to pay my power bill. I'm going to run my air conditioning. And all you people, when it's 106 in Fresno and you can't afford to run your air conditioning, I'm going to run mine because I'm not going to pay my bill. That's one thing. And then wind and solar, Jack, is really inefficient. So they don't make any power at night. And so when you dismantle a coal plant or a nuclear plant or a natural gas, and you say that you're bragging that you've got subsidized solar and wind, it works for the day, but at night there's no power. So then what do? You have to buy it from places that are red states that have coal or nuclear. So here in California, we're building this huge, every time I go down Manning Avenue, there's another square mile of huge panels. But we have I don't know what the figure is, but it's over 100% of our generation requirements are met now during the day because of these massive policies. And they're so massive that we used to give people incentives to put solar panels on their roof. And we had the first group, and then we said, you know what, it's too generous, even though you only got about half for generating it as you paid for using it. And then the second group I came in on like 8 years ago, and it was about equal. And then we're saying, no, we're still broke. We built so many wind and solar. We really don't need everybody to have a solar panel, but can't say that, so we won't really remunerate them. And now then they broke the solar panel industry in California because until you get affordable batteries, the amount of money that you would put for your panels and get back is gone from 3 or 4 years, 7, 8, 10 years. And so now the only people who are putting solar panels are using their own batteries so they can use it at night or something. And it's not that, I think it takes about 10 years to pay back now. And there's no money being invested in the grid. So when you're making inefficient power for non-economic reasons, non-rational reasons, but you're doing it for an ideology of global warming, when the Chinese, it won't matter anyway, the Chinese are polluting the hell out of the planet, but when you're doing that, and then you're making inefficient sources of power, you still have to buy expensive power, and people know that. So California or New York, they know that. So if you're going to import power at night, it's going to be expensive because you have no choice. And then if 1/4 of your customers are not paying that, and you identify them as a protected species of indigenous victims, then somebody's going to have to pay for it. And you're going to pay for it in one of two mechanisms. You're either not going to invest in the grid, and then in California, you often get wildfires from faulty, sparky lines, or you're going to have to raise rates for the idiots that pay their bill on time. And that's what I think. You talk to people. I heard that word maybe 5 times in the last 10 years. Why did you move out of California? I go to Florida, Nevada. I say, I lived in California. And I said, why did you move out? Because I'm not an idiot, Victor. And that means I don't like to pay the highest income taxes, the highest, second or third highest sales, the highest gas taxes, and get the worst schools, the worst infrastructure, the highest crime. And somewhere between the alpha and the omega, to use that metaphor again, there's the reality. And the reality is we have large numbers of very poor people that we've imported or invited into the state, and we have two sets of rules to accommodate them. And one set means they are exempt from consequences of their plight, and the other group has to be non-exempt to pay for it, to subsidize it. And so that's just the way it is. And if you have a large community that's being paid daily in cash and doesn't obey sanitation in terms of disposing of garbage or refrigerators, or doesn't want to spend $30 at the county dump, then they're not going to be prosecuted. They're just not going to happen. I've called maybe in my lifetime of 50 years, 10 times the county or the state EPA when there's really big things like 600 feet worth of broken glass and barrels of oil. I'm talking about a whole vine row where they had oil and lubricants and paint, where somebody just took a big flatbed, got all of his neighbors apparently, all their crap, and then went down a vine row hidden at night and threw it off so it was a blanket. There must have been, Jack, 500 fluorescent light tubes in that. There must have been 300 gallons of paint. There must have been 650-barrel lubricant old oil drums. There must have been, I don't know, 1,000 pieces of 2x4s with nails in them and sheetrock scrap. It was just like that. And I called, and I was told, number one, not only are we not going to take it out of here, and number two, you'll never find their names. They're not going to leave their trash there. And number three, how do we know you didn't do it? And so what do you mean? Well, this all has to be taken, the lubricants have contaminated the site, all has to be taken to a toxic waste dump, which was about 80 miles away. And you're going to have to do it. Or you're going to have to call an authorized, licensed removal service. Or we're going to assume you did it. Or you can just leave it there. The guy said off the record, you can leave it there. And I said, you can't even diss the row. What do you do? And that gets people really angry, all that. And
Holy
so when
mackerel.
you say white people, I don't think anybody understands why Hispanic communities on the border are against illegal immigration. Because once you have that incident in your life, or once your son is accosted by an M13 gang member at school, or once you are a parent in a Hispanic community and you worked really hard for that you have a competitive high school with advanced placement, and suddenly the classroom is swarmed with about 50 people who don't speak English, and you've got to go back to English as a second language, you get angry about that. You really do. Yeah, or the rents go up, or your grandmother has got to go to the heart clinic, and it's a Medi-Cal system, and she always had an appointment, and suddenly you show up and there's 50 people in line that have never been to a doctor.
Yeah.
And then the people who are promoting all this are wealthy white people on the coast who say they feel really good. I have open borders, and people in southern Mexico are getting all this great care. I just don't want to see them because I don't want to. And I have my own concierge doctor, and I get.
Dang.
So it's really bad. It is very bad. And
well,
I don't. It's Donald Trump is the only president in my lifetime that tried to stop it. The only one. The Bushes, neither Bush did. Nope.
It's going to need a chain reaction of revolutions here. Well, we're going to talk about Donald Trump, Victor, and we'll start off with his, his actions on culture with the Kennedy Center. Victor, we'll get your take on this. Kennedy Center gets a house cleaning. Trump to name himself new Kennedy Center board chair. Donald Trump said Friday he would end the terms of multiple members of the Kennedy Center board and make himself a chair of a new board, putting himself at the helm of the Washington, D.C. Cultural Institution. I've decided to immediately terminate multiple individuals from the Board of Trustees, including the chairman, who does not share our vision for a golden age in arts and culture. We will soon announce a new board with an amazing chairman Donald J. Trump, the president, said on Truth Social. Then he went on to talk about how the Kennedy Center last year was hosting drag shows. Anyway, Victor, I it's not as important as other executive orders he's issued, but it is important. Donald Trump's taken back the culture war. Yeah, go ahead,
the NEA. We had one of the potential NEA new directors on, and the
Justin
NEH,
Shubo. Yeah,
Shubo.
right?
Yeah, we've had him on. I don't think he's been nominated yet, has he?
Yeah.
But he would be very good. And then we had the NEH coming up, and then the Kennedy. It was very funny. The Bradley Foundation, of which I've been a member, I think for 13 years. We used to have our annual Bradley Prize ceremonies there at the Kennedy Center for a decade. It's a beautiful venue, and it was very close, to where people were staying in hotels and accessible, but it got too expensive. And there were other problems. I didn't know if this was one of the problems or not, but we haven't had it there in, I think, at least 7 or 8 years. It's too bad. And I think a lot of people feel that it's kind of like the National Cathedral, you know what I mean? These beautiful, iconic places. And we saw the National Cathedral Bishop in action shortly after inauguration when she lectured the Trump family about, I don't know what she was trying to talk, I guess about illegal immigration, that they weren't kind enough or they weren't tolerant enough like she was. And I think she lived in a 6-bedroom mansion. It's kind of like Lloyd Austin lecturing the country on white rage and white supremacy and discrimination. And then unlike Pete Hegseth, who doesn't have Lloyd's money, he lives in a big estate, a $7 million Washington estate.
Yeah.
They're after Pete because the prior administration, as I understand it, he was living in housing for the secretary or federal housing, Pentagon housing, and it needed to be painted, and it was ordered to be painted, and they're painting it now when he's there. So then Pete is an elitist because, you see, he wants his house painted. His house. It's
very nervy
property. Yeah, he's not putting a heated doghouse like the UC Santa Cruz president did. I wrote about that one.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, years ago. That was a sad thing. She killed herself, so I shouldn't make fun of her.
Oh, well.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, where do you even start about all this? There's nowhere to.
Well, he's laid down a marker, and I think that's
yeah.
Just
Kennedy, he's interested. That gets people very angry that he's interested in culture, and he notices that Melania was not put on Vogue's cover, and they've gone after her official portrait. Did you see that? Where
yes,
she wore a tuxedo, they said, and the subtext of that is, this is the most beautiful, stunning, tasteful first lady we've had since Jackie Kennedy. And if she were left-wing, she would be over every magazine, and we'd be gushing about her taste and her beauty.
Oh, my!
But because she's married in the 9th ring of Dante's Inferno to the Lord Satan, Miss Lucifer has to be
right.
Deplatformed, shadow banned, erased, ridiculed.
Yeah. Non-person, and then
the people that write these stories. I was looking, the people who write these stories, Megyn Kelly mentioned it too. They're always 20-something. You know what I mean? They're right out of the Ivy League, and they're not very successful. They're not experts. I'm not saying they're experts on fashion or beauty or anything. They're just angry people who feel that they're a soldier in the phalanx of the left, and each must do their duty, and their duty is to attack anybody that disagrees with them in personal terms.
Snark is it's important for them to be snarky in public. That's a virtue.
Snarky and public. Yeah, snarkily in public.
Snarkily. All right, anyway, we have other important Donald Trump actions, I think, to get your views on, Victor, including the sanctions of the International Criminal Court and South Africa. And if we have time to get your take on the piece you've written for the New Criterion, and we'll do that when we come back from these important messages. We are back, ladies and gentlemen, with the Victor Davis Hanson Show, recording on the 8th of February. This episode is up on Thursday, the 13th. Victor, we talked once or twice about South Africa and just what a hellhole it is. And Donald Trump, I love this. He issued this sanction order against them for targeting the white minority, and he backs resettling Afrikaner refugees. The story is President Donald Trump has signed an executive order sanctioning the egregious actions of the Republic of South Africa. The South African government has passed legislation allowing it to seize white-owned farms without compensation. The executive order goes in shocking disregards of its citizens' rights. The Republic of South Africa recently enacted Expropriation Act 13, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, that's about... I'll just read one other thing here from the executive order. In addition, South Africa has taken aggressive positions toward the United States and its allies, including accusing Israel, not Hamas, of genocide in the International Court of Justice, etc. So, Donald, I mean, of all the things he has to do, right? But to go there and see a terrible injustice, a country of great potential wealth just falling into some, talk about Dante's Ninth Circle. I'm so cool with him doing this. Your thoughts, Victor?
Well, I mean, you're violating the cardinal rule of leftism that because of historic injustice, the victims are perpetually victims for the rest of their life, and the victimizers, even though they may be 3 to 4 generations away from apartheid in some cases, of young kids, they are perennially guilty. So there is no sympathy in the United States given for, say, an 18-year-old who grew up under black majority rule and he's been shot or killed or his dad's farm is taken. And the weird thing about this, it's not like we don't know what's going to happen, because we have a laboratory example. It's called Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. And when Mugabe came in, all the left-wing liberals said he was wonderful. He said exactly what the people in South Africa did, that they were not going to play tit for tat, that the white minority would be left alone, given the same rights as the black majority. Rhodesia was the biggest, I think, wheat producer in Africa. It was a sophisticated cotton producer. British white minority, it was about 10-12% of the population, but it was an enormously wealthy country. And he turned out to be a communist thug every year, and he was subsidized by the West, and then they finally turned on him. He was a killer, he was a brute, he was a dictator, and he confiscated all of those farms, and they all turned into wasteland, basically, and it became a net food import and impoverished. And same thing with South Africa. It had one of the most sophisticated grid systems in the world. It had some of the best infrastructure, port facilities. It had some of the most productive farms, Boer and English. It's some of the most beautiful places in the world, and it's gone. It's got one of the highest crime rates in the world, highest rape, highest murder rates, the major cities. So
they're commies too.
We know where it's going. It's going to go to, and everybody knows it's going to happen. And a lot of the black majority know they will be poorer in 10 years than they are now. And everybody in the United States knows it, and no one will stop it. So this cadre of thieves, because they will confiscate the white farms, destroy them, and then they'll sell the land out and pocket the money to other black people only. And that's why even the Punjabi class or Asians that have been instrumental in South Africa's economic miracle, they're leaving in droves, because it's a racist country now. It's completely racist. The only difference is that the majority is the racist part, and then in the past it was the minority. The minority had apartheid. Well, now the majority has apartheid, basically. And the difference also is that the minority that practiced apartheid, although that was racist, there were two differences from the majority racism today. They were productive. They made this thing bloom for everybody, in a sense, if you believe in trickle down. But more importantly, they were self-critical. So there was a possibility to evolve, because they were Western, and Western societies have built-in free speech and criticism. And so they voluntarily, no, I shouldn't say voluntarily, they had a civil war. They gave up power, and they had a constitutional process to depower them or to make them part of the democracy, and they're a minority, so they don't have power. And the majority is not democratic. It doesn't believe in free speech. It does not believe in self-criticism. It will never change. It'll get more and more racist until there's no more land to confiscate and there's no more wealth to confiscate. And then South Africa will look like all the other countries in Africa. And until one or two, I mean, I'm not being racist or stereotyping, but there are a few, Ghana's trying to do well. It's not necessarily race, it's culture. And unless you adopt a free market society and a constitutional system of government and a separation between church and state and get into tribalism, an independent judiciary, you're not going to have prosperity and security. Just a historical fact. So we're watching this, and I think Trump thinks that there's a lot of people there that are classical liberal farmers or whatever, and they're good citizens, and he doesn't care what color they are. I'm sure if there's a Zulu farmer who has 100 acres and he's on the wrong tribe and they confiscate his, I'm sure they'll do that in some cases. He's welcome to the United States too. I just don't believe, though, that Trump will be able to get away with saying that we're not going to discriminate on the basis of country of origins or race and let in a law-abiding South Afrikaner with all these skills. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It would be a very productive citizen. But apparently he says he will.
Well, problem here with tribalism, and you're right, like the intricate water system, as you mentioned, it falling apart because the job has to go to the cousin. And so I guess it's one thing, Victor, if you had a tribal society, be tribalistic, but you can't have tribalism run a borderline first world.
We're not that far. We're not far that behind because we've had these fires, and we're not talking about the tragedy in Washington, D.C., but once we're over the trauma, I think we're going to learn that there were protocols and there were problems in a systematic failure of the FAA and the people who set the policy for Blackhawks. And some of the decisions that were made were not based on merit. And we know that's true of Los Angeles in case of the water and power director, the mayor, the assistant mayor, etc. And once you substitute tribalism for merit, we know historically where you end up. And I always relate that weird thing that happened to me when I was in a little Russian taxi on the way into Tripoli from the airport. And they were like sinkholes, the holes in the cement and the asphalt. And I said to the driver, who spoke English, why you're the fifth largest exporter of oil. Why do you have not enough asphalt? He said, we're a tribalist country. We hire our first cousin and sometimes a first cousin. And it's depressing, but remember another thing that happens, the word colonialist there's only authenticity in one direction. So in other words, even though a lot of the Boers and English were there as long as, or in some cases longer than tribes that migrated from other parts of Africa, they are still, because they're white, they're considered settlers. However, if you're a black South African and you were to immigrate to a Western society, you're not a settler. So if you are somebody from the Middle East, for example, or from Turkey, and you migrate to Germany, and I can show you what the German people were like in 60 AD or 80 AD or 100 AD, if I read Tacitus' Germania, still, that's not considered that you're an interloper. No. Even if you say to a Turkish immigrant in Germany, you're from an imperialist tradition. The Ottomans were probably the biggest imperialist, the cruelest of all imperialists of the modern era. Doesn't matter. You have a perfect right to go to Germany, and they have no right to go to Turkey. That's the way it works. Just the way it is.
I was stretching to find a piece of paper before, Victor, because what you said, it's happening here. You were talking about the FAA, but I had a headline about Brown University, Brown Medical School gives DEI more weight than clinical skills in promotion criteria for faculty. It's insane. Now, it's not tribalism hiring my uncle.
And the people who wrote that the Dartmouth medical faculty who, there were a lot of DEI people who helped write it, but ultimately there were probably a lot of white liberal people who endorsed that and then went to their faculty lounge and said, "Oh, I did this. I'm going to apply to be the head of the medical school at Harvard because at Dartmouth I had a mandatory DEI criteria that was more important than anything else." When they have a brain tumor, they will not get somebody from Dartmouth. That's for the ghetto. That is for the bar. That's for poor white people. All the people who make these DEI decisions will find concierge doctors that were based on merit. They may be Indian, they may be Chinese, they may be black, but they will be based on merit. Non-merit is for other people. And the problem with these white professional bi-coastal left-wing people who gave us DEI is that sometimes they can't escape the consequences of their own ideology. I don't want to stereotype the people in Pacific Palisades, but a number of them were very left-wing.
Yeah.
And voted for these people. And there's a number of people that fly and they vote for this, and they are going to be subject. We're in a very dangerous position right now as far as I get very tired when I know Sean Duffy, I like him a lot, but he has to say that flying statistically is very safe. It is. But that hides the fact that if you look at go-arounds, for example, for various causes, we had almost a record year, I think, in 2023. We've had near misses. New York Times wrote extensively about it. They were very worried about it. So everybody knows the problems that have existed. We've had long investigative reports that the FAA was spending a huge amounts of money on DEI, but was not updating its computers. I was on a flight to Fresno, of all places, by I won't name the airline, a pilot sat next to me, and he told me, well, he wasn't happy that he had to go to Fresno for a variety of reasons about the airport. But he said, and I said, well, at least it's American. He said, what do you mean, at least it's American? And I said, well, we have the very sophisticated air traffic. No, we don't. And I said, what do you mean we don't? He goes, Europe is much more advanced than we are as far as their avionics and computers and tracking and radar. He said, and I said, why is that? He said, well, we spend things on different things. Then he went into a tirade about, and he wasn't a United pilot, about United pilots had announced, he said the year before, and I looked it up, it was true, that 50% of all their trainees in pilot training by statute, their own statute, had to be minorities, regardless of their background. So they were turning away military pilots, everybody. So that's just a fact. And that means maybe an 80% of it won't matter. They'll be trained fine, but you might be in a plane where a person wouldn't have been qualifying if he didn't fit a DEI category, and there might have been a military pilot that would have, and that might in that particular distance.
Didn't United have a CEO who was?
I think so.
Delta
did too, didn't Delta? Was it Delta that? I think it was Delta that. Didn't they boycott the All-Star team or something in Georgia?
Well, that was because of the election. Actually, the All-Star game was moved from Atlanta because of the Georgia election law. It was moved to Colorado.
A lot of people find out that Stacey Abrams really did lose by 50,000 votes. She was never elected governor, but her PAC or her get out the vote was completely corrupt.
Yeah.
And embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars and owes big fines. And it's
nice work if you can get it.
Yeah, it is. But when you look at that, I don't want to get into it. I'm not an expert, but when you look at the disaster that took all those lives, all those young people, was horrible at Reagan. You start to look at it and you think, who made the decision that military people would be flying anywhere near one of the busiest air corridors in the United States at night? If they wanted to have very challenging conditions for combat at night, maybe they could have gone somewhere else. And who made the decision they would be wearing night vision goggles with limited peripheral vision? And who made the decision? Who made the decision that they were at 340 feet rather than 200? And who made the decision that they would be on a different frequency than the airliner? They couldn't communicate. And who made the decision that they weren't warned earlier where their trajectory might end up? And who made the decision there were not enough air traffic controllers in the tower at the time? Who made about a series of 8 or 9 administrative, staffing, and operational decisions that all had to be in sequence to work? And what I'm getting at is those sequences exist every single day, and there's near misses, but they all have to line up perfectly. And the odds are when they say air traffic control is safe, they're absolutely right. It's safer than any other mode of transportation. But when those series of choices line up, it's not Victor's hit by one other car, or there's a 4-car pileup. It's 60, 70, 80, 100, 200 dead all at once in a traumatic event. And so to prevent any chance of those dominoes lining up all perfectly, which are necessary, given there used to be all of these safety, double safety, triple safety checks on that happening, and they're not there anymore. Is what I'm saying. They're not there because we are making decisions on operation, staffing, promotion, tenure, retention that are not based on pure merit. I'm not saying that everything is always based on pure merit. There's the old boy network. My boss's third cousin called me up. I'll hire him. My son is a great fireman. I understand that, but there is exams, and there are experience on applications. And when you ignore all that, or you lessen or you deprecate the importance, then what you're doing is you're setting up a domino effect, and it's going to happen. And so and that's what they need to explain to all of us.
Right.
That unless they want to be more candid and say, Victor, of course, we're hiring people that don't have the highest test scores, and they don't have the best grades, and they don't have the best experience. And until they master their craft, or maybe they can't, we don't know, there's going to be a heightened chance of an accident, but we're willing to have some collateral damages for the purposes of DEI. DEI is so important that to make an omelet, a few eggs have to be broken.
Right.
And so you might have to play a little bit of musical chairs and hope you get the chair when the music stops. That's what it is.
Yeah. The day before on that American Airlines flight at Reagan, there was another near miss, and it was a flight from Hartford, which is a flight I've taken there frequently. This same flight. So
I mentioned on the air, and I had a pilot. I was in Los Angeles and Salt Lake in the same year, what they call a go around, and they all say, some pilots say, "Well, that's very common." But I saw the plane make a sharp. I saw a plane that we made a sharp turn. And in the case of the other one, that was at LAX. It was almost zero visibility, but there must have been somebody who was not supposed to be on the tarmac, because we touched down and took off again.
Oh my!
And not touched down. Our wheels were down, and we were almost, you were about an inch away from the tarmac, and then we went straight up. And then you look in the paper and you see there's been a lot of accidental hits. Like a baggage carrier hits a plane, or
right.
I think 3 weeks ago a plane hit another plane when they were going very slow. And it's a very complex system that's overtaxed and has been neglected. It's not just DEI, it's everything, technology, protocol, and it's ossified, and we better do something about it. And that's a larger question. But until we do, there's going to be an element at risk that doesn't have to be there.
Well, Victor, let's end the show today by getting your tell us about this essay you wrote for the new criterion, MAGA Agonistes.
Well, agonistes is a fancy name we get agony from it, but it comes from the Greek word agon, which is a word for contest, or a sporting event, but the sense of a challenge. And agonistes is the adjective; it just means under assault or being attacked. So Trump being attacked, or Trump as an object of contestation. And what I meant is that as he gets this MAGA, and I wrote it before the election. I think I did the earliest draft, and then it just came out. But
the February issue of the new criterion.
It's been an editing. It was written. I submitted it right after the election, as I remember, but I wrote it before. I thought he was going to win, but my point was there were certain things he had to be careful because he was going to be tried on them. And I listed 3 or 4. One, for example, if you say you're going to lower taxes on Social Security or end them, recipients, if you say wages are going to be tax exempt, if you even bring up the question of maybe military personnel or first responders, then you have to add all of that up, and you might get over a decade, $1 trillion of tax revenue that's lost. So then if you say you're going to be for a balanced budget, where does that money come from? Now, there's an argument for it, as I said in the article. If you're Elon Musk and you say for everything that Trump said that he's going to exempt a certain category of people, 2 things must happen. I must cut 50 cents for every dollar of tax loss, and then we must deregulate and de-tax in a way that will grow the GDP so that the slice of revenue is bigger, kind of, Art Laffer's Laffer curve. So that was one challenge that I talked about. Another challenge was that and we saw this with Gaza, which hadn't come up when I wrote the article. If you are a MAGAite and you believe that we have had optional military engagements that are not in the U.S. interest, and we have spent blood and treasure in Iraq and Syria, but especially Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're not in the U.S. interest, or in a cost-of-benefit analysis, it doesn't work to go overseas and fight under the conditions of our enemy's preference. House to house in Basra, house to house in Fallujah, Helmand province in Afghanistan. Then you have to avoid those. And that's what MAGA said. Pete Hegseth was at the border. We're going to defend our borders, not Ukraine's. Good. Okay. But he's not coming in after just Obama. He's coming after, I think, the worst president in 100 years who has destroyed deterrence. And what do I mean? I mean, from when Biden came in office, Blinken and Sullivan were utterly humiliated in Anchorage in that summit with the Chinese. They just dressed them down. I mean, they sent a Chinese spy balloon, and we're learning more about it, with impunity over the United States. I'm talking about the humiliation in Kabul, they say $8 billion, but when you look at all the vehicles, military and non-military, and all the infrastructure, the $1 billion embassy, $300 million retrofitted base, even the gender studies program at the University of Kabul. When you look at all of that money, it's probably $50 billion. Humiliation. When you say, I will react to a Russian invasion, depending on whether it's a major invasion or not, or I offer to get Zelensky out of Ukraine, or I put a hold when I come in on offensive, whatever Biden did, I won't even get in. Daylight between us and Israel, which he announced. Anytime you say there's going to be daylight between us and Israel, somebody's going to go in that daylight, called Hezbollah, Hamas around. Okay. So now he has to restore deterrence. And indeed, he's been bombing the Houthis, in Yemen. And he's going to have to deal with Iran, maximum pressure. Iranian parliament said yesterday, Jack, that he himself wants to kill Donald Trump, and he will kill Donald Trump. He's a member of their parliament, and he said that everybody in the government agreed with him. So to dispel that idea, you're going to have to use military force. In the first term, Donald Trump took out Baghdadi and bombed the crap out of ISIS. He took out Soleimani, and we got involved on the ground. But we didn't get in a big way. So all I was saying in this, for MAGA to be realist and to deter its enemies so it does not have to go to war, you're going to have to increase the defense budget, make sure you got more recruits, and you're going to have to use military force because somebody is going to be stupid enough to challenge you. And if you don't, then you're going to end up like Biden. And yet that use of force will come under criticism. So when he said something about Gaza, this has not worked, the United States must do, there were people in his base that, what are you talking about? I voted for you to get out of the Middle East, not to go into Gaza. That was another contradiction. And then I said a third contradiction, I'll just stop at 3, there's a lot in there, is it? If you say you're going to drain the swamp, and this is before his appointee, so I didn't know exactly who he's going to appoint when I wrote it. But if you're going to say, I'm going to drain the swamp, you can't have a swamp creature in there. So I'm not going to judge his first term appointments, but Rex Tillerson, Jim Mattis, John Bolton, Bill Barr, I go down the line. They were people of the establishment. And they were not MAGA people, but they knew the environment. They were fish that swam in that type of water. So you're saying that type of water is going to be drained and the fish with it. Okay. So then you're going to have to get non-traditional people who are MAGA people. And you're going to have a problem because when you nominate Pete Hegseth and Kash Patel and Pam Bondi and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK, they're going to go nuts. So you're going to have to stick by them no matter what, because they will try to destroy these people because they know what they're going to do when they get in. They are not going to act like a normal Republican appointee. I'm sober and judicious, and there's pros and there's cons, and I'm open for dialogue in a bipartisan fashion. I know that we are a little bit excessive, and maybe you are, and we're going to split the difference. No. You're going to have to go in there and say, the top level of the FBI is warped, politicized, it's got to go. So these people are going to have to come from a non-traditional background, like Kash. Not that he didn't qualify, he was more than qualified, but he was a critic. And so what Donald Trump squared that circle is, and he did this after I wrote it, he didn't read it, it was in editorials. He just said, you know what? I got to get a non-traditional person that's going to drive them crazy. I don't know if they're going to get it confirmed or not, but I'm going to get people who are victims of the agency in which they're going to run. Tulsi Gabbard, terrorist watch list. Now she's director of national intelligence. Kash Patel, the FBI snooped on him. Now he'll run the FBI. Pete Hegseth wrote a book critical of the Pentagon that drove him crazy. Now he's going to direct the Pentagon. RFK, they hated him, HHS, for years. Now he'll run HHS. Jay Bhattacharya, the people in Fauci tried to destroy him. Now he's going to be running NIA. That was the attitude. So I was trying to say that if you're really going to stage a counter-revolution, you've got to deal with these contradictions of tax cut but balance the budget, or we're not getting involved, not getting involved in wars that are up. Then you're going to have to use force to make sure that happens. And then if you're going to drain the swamp, you're going to have to get very controversial people to do it. They're going to have to be by nature controversial. You do not want a non-controversial person because they're going to have to go in there with a mission. And
go
he's done
along,
very
get
well.
along, gets run over. Yeah, no question.
Exactly. Get compromised. So
yeah.
That was
Well,
that's what the
well,
article's about. It's in this issue of the New Criterion.
Yeah, terrific essay, and there's a very good magazine, The New Criterion. You should go Google it, find it, and consider subscribing. And I forget if I mentioned subscribing to the Blade of Perseus, but you should do that, folks. It's $65
You should.
for
we
a
have
year.
a new we have a new thing. I write a 750-word article on Monday for Tuesday for users only, another one on Wednesdays for users, but in place of the third one, we now do a 10-minute video.
Sometimes in them, Victor wears a hat, and sometimes he doesn't.
Sometimes I wear the hat, whether it's I turn off the heater in here and I get cold.
It's a cool hat, Victor.
See?
Yeah. Well, Hey,
I
listen.
get anyway. That's why.
Well, we'll end this as we typically do. I'm gonna thank those who take the time and effort on Apple, and you can do this other place. At least Audible. Now I know about Audible and Victor's own website. People leave comments about all sorts of things, and we read them. We go look for them. We read them. Appreciate. On Apple, you can also rate the show 0 to 5 stars, and Victor's average over 7,000 people who've done that. Thank you. This is 4.9 plus, and some people leave comments there on Apple. Here's one. It's titled Podcasts and the FBI. I'm new to podcasts, about to turn 82, so I figured I was old enough now to start. So happy to find Victor. Surprised you survived academia all these years. So happy to see the lid come off the FBI. A typical criticism starts off by saying it's just the heads that's corrupted, not the, quote, hard-working field agents, end quote. I'm sure there's still some good ones out there, but a fish may rot from the head, but it still rots. I've been critical since Ruby Ridge, when all the Muellers, etc., just promoted themselves out of the muck and went forward like nothing happened. Anyway, keep on keeping on, and this is signed BLAATL, so blah, addle, I don't know. But
I wrote something
thank you.
about it. Yeah. James Comey didn't come out of nowhere, and either did Andrew McCabe or Christopher Wray. They came from somewhere.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they're gone somewhere forever. Victor, you've been very great, the usual with the wisdom. I just want to quickly thanks those who subscribe to Civil Thoughts, which I do at the Center for Civil Society, where we try to strengthen civil society. And every Friday comes an email, free, not selling your name, none of that business. And what are you going to get? 14 recommended readings, really good pieces I've come across the previous week. So if you go to civilthoughts.com, sign up, you'll start getting it, and you will enjoy it, I assure you. So thanks to those who do that. Victor, you've been terrific. Thank you. Thanks to our sponsors. And folks, happy Valentine's Day. That's tomorrow, and we wish you that, and love and happiness. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Much appreciated.
certain future. But there is, however, one species that has become increasingly dependent on our towns and cities. These swifts have just travelled over 3,000 miles from sub-Saharan Africa to Jerusalem in the far west of Asia. In the heart of this ancient city, they nest in walls that have stood here for 2,000 years. The Western Wall. It's one of the holiest sites in Judaism, and swifts doubtless have nested here ever since it was built. The cracks between the stones are just the sort of nest sites that swifts like. Across the Middle East, these birds rely on human structures. And if they can, they return to the same nest site each year. This one is waiting for its partner to arrive. They pair for life, but only come together for the short breeding season. After 9 months apart, they are united once again. This couple are among the lucky ones. They have a chance of raising a family this year. But some will never find a home. The urban world on which they have relied is changing. Old buildings are being replaced by cliffs of glass and steel. There are no nooks and crannies here. With fewer places to nest, swift populations the world over are in decline. But every pair that breeds successfully brings hope for the species. In this nest, good news. The parents are now raising 2 chicks. Growing youngsters need feeding every hour. Swifts do everything on the wing, from catching thousands need feeding every hour. Good news. The parents are now raising 2 chicks. Growing youngsters need feeding every hour. Swifts do everything on the wing, from catching thousands of insects to collecting water, a task which requires very precise aerial maneuvers. In a few weeks, these chicks will also take to the skies. They may then remain in the air continuously for 3 years until they're mature enough to return and breed themselves. But as historic cities are transformed by modern structures, the birds will face an even greater challenge. We should surely leave enough space for those few creatures in the world who still choose to live alongside us.